Welcome to All Business, No Boundaries, a collection of supply chain stories by DHL Supply Chain, the North American leader in contract logistics. I'm your host, Will Haywood. This is a place for in-depth discussions on the difference DHL makes on your supply chain challenges. Today's episode is Scaling Loyalty, how Torrid and DHL redefine returns in modern retail. Let's dive in. Today's episode is all about partnership and scale in modern retail. Torrid operates at the intersection of digital growth, store presence, and fierce customer loyalty. Product returns play a critical role in that experience. We'll explore how Torrid's business model has evolved, why returns became a strategic focus, and how collaboration powered a major transition behind the scenes. So I'd like to welcome my guests today. We have John and Ryan, and we'll start off as we always do. I'll ask you each to introduce yourselves. So your name, your role, the company you work for, and how long you've been there. So John, let's start with you.
Yeah, so my name's John Ball. I'm with Torrid. I've been here approximately 3 years, and I'm vice president of supply chain.
Terrific. Ryan, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Dupuis. I've been with DHL for about 18 months now. We were acquired in January of last year, but I've been part of the DRN organization now for 15 years, and my role is the director of product solutions and onboarding.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you both for being here. I've been looking forward to this discussion. We had an episode covering the DRN probably about a year ago, so it's nice to pick up and have a live customer along with us this time. Maybe before we get further, Ryan, DRN stands for?
Yeah, great question. DRN is the DHL Returns Network.
Okay. John, some of our listeners may not know all about Torrid, so maybe let's start there with what is the company, the brand, who are your customers, approximate size and scale, how you guys define yourselves in the market.
Yeah, great question, Will. So Torrid is a leading fashion brand dedicated to helping women in sizes 10 to 30 look and feel amazing. And we serve a very loyal customer base, uh, not only through our digital side, but we also have storefronts across the United States. We really focus on destination for fit, style, and community is our main thing. We're about $1 billion a year company. We have 450 stores, and then we have our web business, which is coast to coast and actually worldwide. So we do have stores up in Canada, along with the United States, and it's been a great experience for me to be here over the last 3 years. And by the way, I'm very pleased to be on your podcast today too.
Oh, we're happy to have you on it. And you're based out, you were telling me you're based out of Columbus, Ohio. I know you've been in the industry for a bit. So pre-Torrid, what were you doing?
Yeah, so I've had the great pleasure, and I don't want to date myself here because I know Ryan's on the call. He's one of the young bucks coming up. So, but I've been distribution and logistics leader for many years. I've worked with global brands such as American Airlines, Frito-Lay, PepsiCo, Rite Aid, Big Lots, and Torrid. Really my specialty is high volume distribution, reverse distribution, and pharmacy operations. And I probably led a lot of different teams, but my main focus is always peak performance and optimizing supply chains to keep the business moving.
Okay, so you mentioned returns in there, and that's where we're going to focus today. So how does Torrid approach product returns as a business requirement overall? What's been your experience over your 3 years there, John? And then how did the two organizations come together in the first place?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate to been associated with a lot of in-house returns and out-of-house returns. So we actually returns is always one of those back of the house situations, and people really don't look at it that much. It's there. We utilize it for our customer loyalty. Our goal is to, if a customer orders something and tries it on and doesn't fit or they don't like it, we allow them to return that, and they can either return it at a store or they can return it directly to us. So when it does get returned back to us, of course, the customer wants to get their refund as quickly as possible. So that's one of the things we try to do is try to get a return back to the DC, get it refurbished and all that process, and then be able to give that customer credit back onto their account. At the same time, we are always looking to utilize our returns back into the mix of our operation. So we want to look at getting that item back onto the web and up for sale again. So uh, when I got here 3 years ago, we had an in-house returns processing system. I think it did well on the low time, but scalability was very, very difficult. And one of the things we did find is that when business, you start hitting different peaks during the year, returns would get pushed off the side, and then you begin to get backlog, which would associate issues with getting customer credit and things like that. So we began to go out and look. We found DHL as a partner. We talked, and then we came to uh, you know they could suffice what we needed to do, which is process the returns and get the credit back to the customer as quickly as possible, and then actually get the item back to us so we could put it back on the web and resell it. So it was one of those partnerships that I think when we started discussing this stuff, it was going to be very quick. It actually turned into a little longer than we anticipated, but again, they satisfied a niche. At the same time, by doing that, we were able to have a huge cost savings uh, in the first year, and actually we're seeing the same cost savings in the second year. So again, it's cost mitigation. At the same time, we're able to turn our inventory from the returns back into the operation to get it back on the web and get it back for sale. So it becomes an inventory utilization. So
Okay, gotcha. So, Ryan, when you first got a look at Torrid's business and got to have some discussions with John, what sort of jumped out to you about their requirements or their business or their company?
Yeah, a few things. Will first is the biggest thing that jumped out is it was a fit. It was a fit for us. It wasn't something that we haven't done before. Apparel is one of the most recent trends, I would say, in the return space is going from that, yeah, the brick and mortar retail stores sending back product that needs to get sent back to vendors, and it's shifted into the e-commerce space with products coming back, credits to the consumers, and then getting that product back in the stock, like John had mentioned. So apparel being on the leading edge of most of the omni-channel clients fit really well with what we do with a lot of other folks. That said, seeing it in John's site, you could tell when we walked through the facility with John, he had a vision already for that area that was allocated to returns. And he was thinking of how he could take the labor that was in that area and the space and turn that into a revenue center for him. And you heard it, John, when you were mentioning it a few minutes ago, you talked about how returns are often shoved in the corner. Um, and John had a pretty difficult task in front of him in the sense that he's worked in many different areas and many different industries and companies where he's been able to outsource things like returns in the past. But at Torrid, had an organization and a culture that was not used to outsourcing. So John was kind of on the leading front of his team, trying to push for a 3PL, if you will, or a partner to come in and handle the returns aspect. So he had an uphill climb, but through the vision of being able to take that space that they were allocating the returns and the folks that were there doing the returns and converting them into a profit center for fulfillment and meeting the demands of their clients was a huge win for him. And it allowed us to specialize in what we do best in the DRM, which is focus on returns, and allow John to do what they do best, which is focus on their customers.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And I don't know that a lot of people appreciate sort of the visual differences of distribution operation that is sending new product out versus one that is receiving returns in. And John, as I understand it, you were doing both activities in the same building when you first arrived.
yeah, and a lot of times you get into, and I'll tell a story here after this, but you get into that situation that your building exceeds the space, and now I need that return space to support my outbound or my storage in the facility. That really wasn't the situation with us. It was more of we were at a cost premium because again, over time, that's I'll say it. And if you cut it out, you cut it out. But in the distribution, that's where you go to retire. You go to the return center, the in-house return center, and it's the Shady Acres Return Center, and you retire over there. So, but from that standpoint, ours was really more of a play for cost and more efficiency in the building. And there's two things that happened. Ryan's absolutely right. It was an uphill battle for me. I had to go to the C-suite and explain what we're doing, and I'm with the company. I think 8 months at that time, and so I really had to put my best salesman hat on and go tell the CFO and COO and everybody, hey, we want to do this, and they've never done it before, and they've never really been in that 3PL world. So I think from that standpoint, Ryan, Ryan and myself were kind of holding hands through this whole thing. And the second thing is, when we went out to bid this with DHL, we were at probably a low end number of units a year. When we began to do business with them, at the same time, our business decided to begin to transform its store base, and so we began to close stores. Is what happened. Underperforming stores or stores that were coming up on lease, and uh, you know, DHL was with us through that whole thing. So I think I don't know the exact number, but I think we said, hey, this account's going to be 1 million units a year. Well, last year it was about 1.6 million units, and all that was due to us closing stores and send that back to DHL for them to process that. And I gotta say, during that time, they always stayed within the SLA, so I was able to take that additional units, they were able to process it. And I was able to get that back into this facility here in West Jeff and put it back in stock to sell it again. And what that is a huge win for us. It's not only from a costing point of view, but from our standpoint, we could have never flexed up to the amount of people that DHL was able to flex up to and take care of that business. And so, you don't expect to do that. We didn't expect to do that, but it was one of those things that, they really stood by us on that and got us through that whole situation to the point where I don't think anything ever aged over 14 days, which is pretty incredible. Because if we were to do that here with our own in-house team, you could probably double that number in aging inventory sitting somewhere in the building. So that's just true a testament to what they're all about. And it's always nice to go back to the C-suite a year later and say, hey, we saved X number of dollars by doing this. Oh, and B, we were able to take the working capital and put it back into the operation so it could be resold again. So that's just a huge win for me because again, they begin to trust you a little bit more if you bring the next thing to the table. That's what it is. So.
Yeah. So within those 14 days, what activities take place, Ryan? And then forecasting is tough in a best case scenario, right? I think it's harder on the return side. How do you absorb unexpected volume and flex up to do that and still hit some of the performance criteria that John was looking for?
Sure. Yeah, it's a testament to two things. One is operational excellence and a team that's looking at the forecast, driving their labor based on a forecast. But like you mentioned, returns is really tough when it comes to forecast. The best way you can forecast returns is essentially saying what is the amount of volume that we're selling over a period of time, and our returns is typically X% of that volume, and that's what you think your returns volume is going to be. And to John's point, when you start having things like store closures, it throws a little bit of volatility into that forecast. The benefit that we have within the DRM is we have not only a national network of buildings all over the country, but our buildings are also multi-client facilities. So within one four wall, and where we process for John is a facility we call Rockville. It's in Indianapolis. We have upwards to 20 to 30 different clients in that facility, all of whom have different peaks and valleys throughout the season. Or throughout the year. So we have some clients that have very high returns around the Christmas time, and then it drops off through the spring, and then in the summer it gets really heavy again. So we were able to take that different staff that we have across that building, who are very familiar with not only returns but our platform as well. They're also familiar with apparel for other brands, and we're able to cross train them through our system to be able to move from one client to another to handle those different peaks that we get, so we can absorb it a little bit better during the seasons. So it's a huge benefit to be able to have that multi-client site that shares some of those overall expenses and also allows us to share labor a little bit more fluidly than you otherwise would.
Interesting, makes sense. So, John, whether you're talking your experience at Torrid or other retailers, from a scaling perspective, what do you think are the key elements to enable you to take on more volume or shrink down when demand starts to ebb?
Well, again, I think it's just kind of what Ryan just talked about. So it's one of those things that in a regular distribution center, you know, you have the availability to do that. But if you have huge outbound going on a seasonal reason, it kind of puts all that operation in the back burner. Plus, you end up pulling those people over to help out. So I think that's the key point is, and that's really from the story is you know they're able to scale up and down. And I really think the reasoning behind that is because that's what they really do. And so the question that you always got to ask is, you know, uh, it really can't be another department inside your operation that you're supporting. And that's really how we sold it with our folks. We got to give this to the professionals to have them do it. And because of that, where they were able to do it at a lower cost and they were able to turn our inventory a lot faster for us. So that's probably the key element in that you got to be able to take that and move their own folks. But that's what they do. I mean, I go in the building and they're doing returns. That's their business. That's where you want it to be. So.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that if you don't mind. Is when I applied to work at within the DRN 15 years ago, I had an interesting interview with a gentleman who had been here at the time for 20 years, and he was talking about all the focus they put on returns. And at the time, I had been working for a WMS provider based out of Atlanta, and I said, when we go to a site and we look at the overall functional flow of a facility, we spend 2 weeks talking to every operator in that building, and we design everything from how you receive, how you ship, and everything that happens in between. I said, we spend 5 minutes talking about returns. So, how does this company focus, or this division of a company focus only on returns? The guy sat there for about 20 seconds and then went, well, because people like you only spend 5 minutes talking about it. It's such out of sight, out of mind, throw it in the corner. It is what we do, as John mentioned. It is the thing we are known for. The other analogy I would use that he later said was, you don't go to Five Guys and order a salad. You order what they're good, which is hamburgers, right? And so, in a world like John's world, where he's so focused on fulfilling orders and focusing on the customers, you don't hear apparel brands go out there and say, our most important thing is satisfying a customer and making sure their returns are good. Like, you don't want the return coming back, right? So let that go to somebody who does it for a living, somebody who focuses on it and loves it. And Will, you mentioned earlier the difference between returns and forward. Whenever you talk to anybody in the returns or who's looking for a solution for returns, they'll always preface that like, oh, our inbound looks ugly. And our feedback will always be, it looks beautiful to me, because that's what we're used to. It's a pile of everything you can imagine thrown together. That's what we expect. That's what gets our excitement up, is seeing returns pallets coming into our building. Whereas most companies don't want anyone seeing that. It's what we love.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. John, Torrid has a good reputation in the market with its customers and their loyalty to you. And I know you talked about what I would just describe as sort of a fluid returns process, or an easy to return kind of approach that you guys have clearly taken. I just wonder how you think about that when you have multiple channels to market, obviously multiple channels back. How does that set up, and how do you think about making that as sort of frictionless of a process as possible?
Yeah, I think the first part of it is that we've kind of talked about is, from our standpoint, I get a return. I want to go through the inspection of it. I want to go through what they do up there. I want it refolded. I want it rebagged, and then I need to get back into the DC because I want to resell it. And part of that piece of it is I'm taking a return that somebody returned, and I'm really rebagging it, refurbishing it, and then I'm putting it back and I'm selling it to somebody else. So that's the first thing. It has to go back out as brand new, and I think that check mark has always been taken care of uh, uh, by DRN. So the second piece of it is the speed of it, because I don't want to hold inventory um, either in Rockville or in SGF. I want to get it back on the site. I want to get it out of here as quickly as possible. Uh, so I think those are probably the two biggest components of that. From the other standpoint is, we treat returns as a loyalty moment, is what it is. So a customer returns something, we want them to have a seamless experience with that. So we want them to be able to return it, and we allow them. We have a system that they can begin that process with. They can take it to a Torrid store and return it there, or they can send it back to us. Very soon we'll have other opportunities for them to take it somewhere else, but for right now, we want them to be able to not get caught up in it and to receive their credit as quickly as possible. And that's the other factor that we've seen in the last year, is that they're able to do that. And we don't, we have customer service just like everybody else, and you rarely ever see someone calling up saying, "Hey, I didn't get my credit fast enough," and or I never got my credit is what it is. And we don't ever see, "Hey, I got damaged merchandise when I ordered something from Torrid's website." So I think the customer population accepts the fact that we give them that seamless loyalty opportunity, and I think that definitely is due to the fact of the partnership that we have with Rockville and DRN.
Great. So Ryan, just thinking broadly about your many customers, when somebody new comes in, like John did a few years ago, what are kind of the first, second, and third things that you're looking for to understand, so that you can set them up in a way that's going to be successful?
Yeah, the first is what is their primary need? And it just depends on the client. But in most cases, it's very similar to what John mentioned. It's, hey, we need to make sure our consumers are taken care of, that the customers are getting their credits back. And then second, how quickly can we get the product back in the stock? Outside of that, there's very key things like what is the volume, what is the seasonality, so that we can make sure we labor plan accordingly for that. But then it's also the criteria that's involved in folding the shirt. I know a lot of people don't like hearing this, but um, not everyone can fold a shirt, and certainly by different brands require different levels of folding. So there are some brands out there that if you go purchase them online and it gets returned and you get it at your house, you'll never be able to get it back into that same form in which you received it. And that's important because a brand like Torrid that John mentioned, they've got so much loyalty tied up into the brand that consumers know what to expect. There's an experience in receiving that product at your home. So it's important that we understand what that requirement is so that when our team is being trained to fold and inspect that garment to put it back in the stock, that we're doing it in a way that if one of John's customers orders that item, they can't tell that it came from the DRN. They would think that this is something that was produced off the manufacturing line, put into distribution, and sent to them without ever having to stop anywhere in between. So understanding that requirement is key when you're in something like the apparel space. But outside of that, it's other key things like how important is it the packaging that we discussed? Like, does the item need to go into a certain size bag based on the size of the item? I mentioned already the volume and the disposition. So, what do we feel in terms of how much product should go back in the stock, and what is what are the requirements associated to validating that an item goes back in the stock? And one thing I'll tell you that I've learned over the years is that, in especially again going into apparel, always have to turn certain items inside out because you want to make sure there's no other items within that garment. And the same thing goes with pockets. We've received things from credit cards to wedding rings to um, tissues or masks or whatever you name it, we find it in pockets as we do our inspections. And so if you put yourself in the seat of a consumer, it's important that you check all of those because if a consumer receives a product, they think it's brand new and they reach in the pocket and they pull out John Ball's credit card. They're not going to be too happy to know that somebody else has used it, but they might use that credit card. But nevertheless, like you just want to make sure that the item you give the experience to the consumer that that item had never been returned before.
Yeah, well, I would use John's credit card for sure, and I will willingly admit that I am not a good folder, so I may be rare in that, but never been very good
I'll
at that.
second that.
Okay, so last question for both of you, John. You can go first because you touched on this a little earlier about going to the C-suite, but stepping away from Torrid, maybe it's the same advice, but when you would approach a CFO, CEO, chief operating officer around the subject of returns and what the kind of keys are to driving a business success with a returns network or returns operation, what would some of your advice be?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And actually, I've had to answer that question before, but the thing, the way I look at it is, don't view returns as a back end problem. View it as an inventory opportunity because investing in faster returns and stock cycles directly improves the full price selling windows, is what it comes down to. So, it's sometimes it becomes the problem of the DC. I send it back, it's now your issue. But I think you got to bring that back into the revenue stream and say, no, it's something that, we are going to be able to get this inventory back, and we're going to put it on the web, and we're going to sell it again. And that's really what we've seen over the last year. So we've seen, we track it. I mean, it's like everything else in our world. Here at Torrid, we track that. So returns come back in, we see how many cycles that it may go back out and come back in. But we also look at the fact that, yeah, it came in and it was sold within 3 days from the time we put it back in stock. So we see a very, very nice return from that. And that's the biggest thing. You got to pitch it as an inventory opportunity, and not really as a back end problem. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, very, very similar. Is you can't look at it as just a cost. So if you're looking at returns and you say, I want to get on the path of outsourcing returns to an expert, someone like DHL and the DRN who knows and loves returns, you can't just look at the price tag on it and say, man, this is more than what we're charging today or what we're paying our employees today to do returns in that area of the warehouse, because there's other opportunities within there that you might not be collecting on. All the things that John mentioned, and the experience of the users, the productivity that we're able to achieve, and then also the opportunity costs associated to it. If you're doing this in your own center, how much space are you allocating to that? What could those employees be doing to grow, to drive new profits within your center, as opposed to focusing on returns? Give it to the experts. Give it to somebody who knows what they're doing, somebody who loves it, and somebody who will treat it like their highest priority.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, that's a great way to end us today. Great conversation, really interesting stuff, and it's always fun to listen to two people like you who clearly have a great working relationship and partnership. We'll look forward to hearing a next DRN update, hopefully soon. But between now and then, wish you guys both luck. Have a good summer, and keep it up.
Sounds good. Appreciate it,
Hey,
Will.
thanks
John,
a lot for having
always
me
good to
on
see
today,
you.
Will. Yep. Good to see you too, Ryan.
If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate us and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen to our entire library of episodes on our website, dhl.com/ABNB podcast. See you next time.